Well, after winning or tying the Iowa caucus and winning the New Hampshire primary, Bernie Sanders has now won the Nevada caucus.
And now I'm delighted to bring you some pretty good news. I think all of you know we won the popular vote in Iowa. We won the New Hampshire primary. And according to 3 networks in the AP, we have now won the Nevada caucus.
Let's go over some of the promises Mr. Sanders has made, shall we?
We are going to raise the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour.
A $15 minimum wage? Do you know Jonathan Gruber, the economist who was the architect of Romneycare and one of the architects of Obamacare?
We just tax the insurance companies. They pass it on higher prices. That offsets the tax break we get. It ends up being the same thing. It's a very clever, basic exploitation of the lack of economic understanding of the American voter.
You had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in. It made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money. It would not have passed. Okay, just like lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to get anything to pass.
Yes, that Jonathan Gruber. And here's what this left-wing economist said about the minimum wage. Let's say the government rolled in and set a minimum wage. Workers want to supply more hours than firms want to hire. You end up with excess supply, and we call that excess supply unemployment. We have a downward sloping demand curve. And why is it downward sloping? Because the higher the wage, the fewer workers the firm wants to hire. It would rather use machines instead. End of quote. And the equally left-wing economist who writes for the New York Times, Paul Krugman, at least at one time felt exactly the same way about the minimum wage. The living wage movement is simply a move to raise minimum wages through local action. So what are the effects of increasing minimum wages? Any Econ 101 student can tell you the answer. The higher wage reduces the quantity of labor demanded and hence leads to unemployment. End of quote. And his promise about equal pay for women.
We are going to provide equal pay for equal work for women.
Sigh. Except women are paid equally for the same kind of work. Otherwise, think about it. You're running a business, you have a bunch of guys. But you could hire women at 85 cents on the dollar and have them be equally productive. What would you do? You'd fire all the men, hire the women, and pocket the difference. So the idea that women are not being paid the same as men are for doing the very same work is ridiculous.
When you correct for all the various factors, such as the number of hours worked, the continuous employment versus taking a few years out to have children and so on, you take all that into account, the differences between men and women become quite trivial.
And a little something for the children.
We are going to have high-quality, affordable, universal childcare.
Now, Barack Obama made the very same promise.
It is time that we stop treating childcare as a side issue or a quote-unquote women's issue. This is a family issue. This is a national economic priority for all of us.
Do these guys ever think that maybe, just maybe, excessive regulations might be adding to the cost of childcare?
We need to bring down the cost of childcare. There's no doubt about that. I think we ought to be looking at all the regulations that we put on a lot of childcare industry that it makes it more expensive. That may not be where you want to go with it. Maybe it is. But that's the debate we need to be having, not like, should we be trying to lower the cost of childcare? Of course we should, because it is keeping either women, in many cases, out of the workforce or making it very, very difficult for families to be able to.
But those regulations are there for, every law was passed in reaction to some disaster that happened. So essentially,
as we know, hard cases don't always make good laws, right?
But take away regulations. First of all, I don't think you're going to cut the cost of childcare enough to make it affordable by any stretch.
Well, but those are the studies and the kind of discussions and debates that we ought to be having.
And on housing, let's check out another Bernie Sanders promise.
I grew up in a family that did not have a lot of money. I spent my entire childhood in a rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, New York. And that meant that my family, at least, we didn't have a lot of money, but we didn't have to worry about rents, going up by 10, 15%, which many Americans do. We believe that rent control is an appropriate tool nationally to tell landlords that they cannot simply jack up their rents to any rate that they want.
National rent control? This libertarian lawyer with Reason Foundation begs to differ.
It's not a cliche to say it's a textbook example of bad economic policy. Results that were exactly opposite of the intended. It was not supplying houses to low-income people. It was lowering the supply of houses. It was lowering the quality of houses.
There were more people, I believe, living in Manhattan prior to the rise of rent control and prior to the rise of government housing projects. My gosh, at one time, the Lower East Side of New York was the most tightly packed place in the world. New York and San Francisco have very long rent control laws, old ones and severe ones. And yet when you look at the cities with the highest rents in the country of any major cities, they are number 1, New York, and number 2, San Francisco.
So what's going on? Why does the political system produce a perverse outcome, which is then supported in the press? Try to mention a repeal of rent control, and the New York Times will go after you immediately.
Absolutely. What happens in rent control around the world, really, because it's been tried so many times, is that people, if the rent control is severe, the people either reduce the amount of housing they build, or they stop building housing altogether.
Next up, education.
We are going to triple funding for low-income Title I schools.
Oh, so that's the problem. We are not spending enough money on education. Never mind that the United States spends more money K through 12 than virtually any other country on the face of the earth. Whatever it is, it ain't enough.
But the education that black kids are receiving is a national disgrace. And there's some recent evidence of this has to do with the Baltimore schools. And the Baltimore schools is just one among many schools that have the similar problem. It turns out that in 13 of the 39 Baltimore schools, not a single student tested proficient in math. And in 6 other Baltimore schools, only 1% tested proficient in math. Now, some people say, well, gee, the problem is finances. Well, it turns out that's just plain nonsense. That is, of the 100 largest school districts in the country, Baltimore ranks 4th in terms of spending on students.
But Sanders and the Democrats avoid one obvious thing to do: empower the parents so the money follows the child rather than the other way around.
Now, the proposal that I brought forth on education ends all private charter schools in this country.
Money collected from taxpayers is used to fund public schools, which children are then assigned to by geographic location. This one-size-fits-all approach doesn't do a good job meeting needs, and the absence of competition often results in poor levels of service and lackluster academic performance. Fortunately, when we understand the problem, it's not difficult to identify a solution. Across America, more and more states are giving parents the freedom to choose how their education dollars are spent. School choice allows parents to choose a school that best meets their child's needs, whether public, private, virtual, charter, or homeschool, regardless of the specific zip code where they reside. This allows parents to spend their education dollars how they see fit. Studies have shown that when parents have a choice, academic performance and graduation rates tend to rise.
About health care?
Somehow or another, Canada can provide universal health care to all their people at half the cost. UK can do it, France can do it, Germany can do it, all of Europe can do it. Gee whiz, somehow or another, we are the only major country on earth that can't do it. Why is that? And I'll tell you why. It's because last year the healthcare industry made $100 billion in profits. Pharmaceutical industry, top 6 companies, $69 billion in profit. And those CEOs are contributing to Pete's campaign and other campaigns up here.
Let's clear this
up. So maybe it is finally time that we said as a nation, enough is enough. The function of a rational healthcare system is not to make the pharmaceutical industry and the drug companies rich. It is to provide healthcare to all people as a human right, not a privilege.
Mr. Vice President,
no premiums, no
Mr. Vice President,
no deductibles.
And about this human right, Medicare for all, Senator Sanders insists it will save $2 trillion over 10 years. What did the Washington Post have to say about that?
That's really bullshit.
Let me thank the Koch brothers, of all people, for sponsoring a study that shows that Medicare for all would save the American people $2 trillion over a 10-year period.
Senator Bernie Sanders' plan generously assumes the doctors, hospitals, and drug companies would be paid 40% less than they are now, and that demand for health insurance would jump by 11%. Even if this did happen, the plan would still boost government spending by $32.6 trillion over its first 10 years. Democrats are cherry-picking numbers that even the study's authors say are unlikely to materialize. They earn 3 Pinocchios.
Finally, MSNBC Hall's Chris Matthews, after Senator Sanders' win in Nevada, got criticized for making this analogy.
It is pretty much over unless that changes. I was reading last night, Brian, I know you're a history guy too. I'm reading last night about the fall of France in the summer of 1940. And the general, Renault, calls up Churchill and says, it's over. And Churchill said, how can it be? You got the greatest army in Europe. How can it be over? He said, it's over. So I had that suppressed feeling. I can't be as wild as Carville, but he is damn smart. And I think he's damn right on this one.
In Matthews' defense, he wasn't calling Bernie Sanders a Nazi. He was talking about what he perceived to be the inevitability of Bernie Sanders' victory. To which I say, I'm Larry Elder, and we've got a country to save. I'll see you next time.